which is the best day. You guys have been asking for years for me to show a beautiful, easy, at-home pizza dough, and then obviously how to make it into some truly spectacular homemade pizzas. I think you know that I've been kind of obsessed with making homemade pizza since we got a pizza oven, and especially since my husband John is like the pizza king around here. But I will say, if you don't have a pizza oven, you are still in luck. I'm going to talk through some processes. I'm actually going to show you pizza oven, but also how to do it with a pizza stone in your regular oven, so you can make this no matter what. It is chewy and crunchy. Like, the pizza that for me really hits all the spots is that Neapolitan style crust, where it's thin and crisp on the bottom, but then that beautiful, pillowy, chewy outer crust that is so delightful eating on its own or dipped into a little oil with a little salt, maybe a little chili oil. It's a whole thing. So I will show you how to make the pizza dough. Then I will show you how to really zhuzh up a glorious tomato pie, a pomodoro pie, and then also how to make a white pizza, a garlic white pizza with Swiss chard and lime and serranos for a little heat. So it's a whole day today showing you a bounty of glorious pies, and more than anything, equipping you to make pizza any hour of any day that you like. So pizza dough is one of those things that, like all breads, can be made 100 different ways, a million different ways. It's very personal. It's very temperamental. It's sort of an emotional experience making pizza dough, because yeast, man, when you're using yeast, you gotta sort of coax it along and be loving and gentle. But the good news is that your patience and dedication will pay off. And once you get it done, you're gonna make it all the time. If you don't feel like making your pizza dough from scratch, you can buy it frozen in most supermarkets. You can also go to your local pizzeria and buy some dough from them to make the pizzas that I'm gonna show you in some upcoming videos. But if you feel like doing it all from scratch, here's how. What I have here is a cup of lukewarm water, by which I mean water that is very comfortable to have your hands in. It feels like a lovely, not too warm bath, just warm enough, relaxing, calming. We're not looking to burn our yeast. We're also not looking to make it so cold that the yeast doesn't have a chance to bloom. It needs to be that lovely lukewarm temperature, which is roughly 95 to like 110 degrees. To your lukewarm water, you're going to add a teaspoon of active dry yeast. Make sure you check the expiration mark on your bottle or jar, because expired yeast will not guarantee you the results that you want. Well, let me just tell you something. I have played with a myriad of different dough recipes to try to come up with the most fail-proof at-home pizza dough recipe. And this is a little trick that I find makes a big difference, which is to feed your yeast with a little bit of sugar. I'm talking like a teaspoon of granulated sugar going in here. Another thing that I have found works really beautifully is warm milk. If you want to do like half a cup of warm water, half a cup of warm milk, and then a little pinch of sugar, yeast loves that. Yeast loves a yummy warm milk drink. So I'm just using my fork to stir it all up, and in a perfect world, dissolve the sugar into the water first so that you don't have to overmix with your fork now. But it should dissolve pretty quickly. Yeast is all in there. Let it sit 5 minutes. Here's what's gonna happen. In a perfect world, your yeast is actually going to start to bubble and bloom on the surface of this liquid, which is really cool to see. It's a fun little science experiment for you and your kids to do. But if you don't see bubbles on top, don't immediately freak out. As long as the water looks like smoky and murky kind of, it should be activating anyway. The only problem is, without being able to visibly see the bubbles and be sure that your active yeast is active, you could be working with dead yeast, which means that your dough will not puff. It will not have the rise it needs. So I really do try to make sure that I see the bubbles on top, which is the best way to guarantee. Okay, while our yeast blooms, let me tell you about the process for this dough. So I'm gonna make this dough today using my stand mixer fitted with the dough hook attachment, which is right here. But I oftentimes will do this dough just by hand. In my big wooden salad bowl or any big bowl you have, you bloom the yeast exactly as we're doing here, add the flours together into the bowl, and make a little well where you'll add your olive oil and this bloomed yeast, gather it together into a dough, knead it for a few minutes, and then let it sit for 15 minutes, and you'll proceed exactly as you do with the rest of this process. So if you don't have a stand mixer, do not freak out. It makes you feel very like Italian temptress to do it all by hand, so I highly recommend. But I am working as fast as possible today to get to show you the gorgeous pies you're gonna make with this dough. And there are a couple periods in this process where you do need to be patient and wait. So moving it along. While the yeast is blooming here happily in its yummy, sugary, warm water, let's go ahead and measure out our flours. I'm gonna use a combination of double O flour, which is a super finely milled Italian wheat flour that you can easily pick up, actually in a lot of grocery stores now, but definitely online, with bread flour. Bread flour has a higher gluten content, so it really helps to cultivate that extra chewy, delicious crust that I crave. If you don't have bread flour, use all-purpose flour, no big deal. You want 1.5 cups of both, but something interesting. 1.5 cups of your double O flour, because it's so finely milled, will weigh less than 1.5 cups of your bread or all-purpose flour. So that's kind of fun. So I'm gonna do it by weight on my weight measure here, but definitely just 1.5 cups if you don't feel like measuring it. Setting my bowl down and tearing it, which means bringing it back to 0, negating the weight of this bowl. So 1.5 cups of double O flour will be about 180 grams. You know I'm not huge on precise measurements, normally speaking, so enjoy the rare experience. Into our stand mixer. Now again, with the bread flour, I want about 210 grams on this one. 2 teaspoons of salt, kosher salt. Nothing drives me crazier than bread that doesn't have salt in it. Every element of your pizza needs to have flavor. Don't skimp on the salt. And honestly, I don't even bother with this sometimes, but you can give it a little mix just to distribute the salt into both flours. Okay, so our yeast has been sitting about 5 minutes. Come and see the lovely puff, the cloud of bloom that has situated itself on top. Go ahead and into the well that you formed here in your flour, pour your lovely yeast. If there's anything left in the bottom, I just do a splash more water, swizzle it, pour it in. And then I like to do like 2 tablespoons of olive oil right into the mix. And then from here, you just turn it on to like a medium speed, and you'll see your little dough ball will soon come to form. So at roughly the stage where it looks like there's a little dryness on the surface of the bowl that the dough is not picking up, grab a spatula and just scrape down the sides of your bowl, releasing any pieces that are sort of sticking to this periphery, gathering it all back together with the rest of your dough. And if it looks too shaggy and dry, see right down there, you can add just a tablespoon more water, just a little splash, and it will all gather together. One more thing to note, the good news is you are literally doing this step in the process specifically to develop gluten, so don't worry about mixing it too much right this second. There she goes. So right about the point where it starts making a ton of noise and banging hard against the sides of your mixer is when you know your dough is ready to be pulled out. It should be a glorious ball like so. We are going to place it to rest in a bowl for about 15 minutes. And the reason we're doing that is because you can see right now it's lovely and sticky and beautiful, but we just worked the heck out of the gluten in this flour, and we want to let it rest for 15 minutes, then we will knead it again. And the working of the gluten is what creates the structure of the crust, the chew, the beauty of pizza. So don't skip on this step. With a towel over top just to help lock in some moisture for 15 minutes in a warmish, well-ventilated place. Okay, the dough has rested about 15 minutes. Et voila. You see, it actually won't have puffed up very much, just a little bit. The flour has started to get hydrated with the liquid in our mix. You don't need a ton of flour. I just add like a little bit onto my work surface to help me with the kneading. And now here is where you get your meditative kneading, life in order, arm workout, pizza is coming experience. The kneading process, oh, by the way, if you have tons of bracelets like I do, one trick that I have found to be very helpful is I put like a sweatband over my bracelets and then they don't move, which is lovely in this process. The dough kneading process, you can see I'm sort of gathering the front half back and then using the heel of my hand to drive it forward. Then rotate 90 degrees, bring the front part back, use my heel of my hand to drive it forward, rotate 90 degrees, front to back, heel forward, rotate, front to back, heel forward. And this stage of the kneading is to do that second development of the gluten to really continue to stretch it and make it super elastic and chewy I'm gonna knead here at least 3 minutes. You don't wanna over knead your dough because then it can get a little tough, but at that 3-minute mark, it should be lovely and still pliable, kind of like the texture between Play-Doh and taffy with a little bit of stretch to it. If you can, make this dough like a day before you plan to use it, because ideally you'll let it ferment overnight in the fridge, 12 to 24 hours. And what that cool experience does is it slows the reaction of the yeast so that it takes longer to ferment so it has longer time to ferment the sugars in the flour, and you really build up that delicious, robust, rich, nuanced flavor of the crust and also the structure that you want with pillowy bounciness and chew and also crisp crust on the bottom. This dough is beautiful. It's the right texture. You can see it has a lovely bit of tug on it still, nice and springy, but has some firmness to it, which is good. Cut your dough in half using a knife or a bench scraper. And I like to actually just sort of tuck the underside around and to form like a little biscuit situation, like so. Give it a little round shaping. That is purely personal preference. But it does, I find, give you a beautiful dough ball to play with when it has risen into a greased bowl for each of these dough balls. So just a little splash of olive oil and rub it around the sides. And then you can cover this with a dish towel, but I actually find that plastic wrap really locks in the moisture. It helps prevent any skin from forming. Once they are wrapped in plastic wrap, go ahead and, just for good measure, tuck them in a warm place, well ventilated, not too warm, just comfortable, temperate experience. 3 hours, they're gonna puff up, they're gonna develop twice their volume, they're gonna be lovely and springy and be able to be turned into any pizza you choose. 3 hours later, your dough will look like this. Wow. Look at the beauty of pillowy, soft, homemade pizza dough. So gratifying. Obviously, this dough can now be used to transform into any pizza of your choosing, or you can actually freeze it. And I will put instructions for how to properly freeze this dough and have it in your freezer for the next 1 to 2 months in the written recipe on daphneoz.com. So head there if you'd like those instructions. But we're not waiting a month to eat this. We are about to make the most delicious Pomodoro pizza straight into your kitchen with inspiration from one of my all-time favorite places to eat, which is at Jelena in Los Angeles. And we are also going to make a spicy, garlicky white pizza with Swiss chard and Serrano and lime. It is a powerhouse. It's a garlic knot plus a salad plus a pizza all in one, and you're gonna love it. So let's make some pizza with this dough.